Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Peter Fenger. My guest today is John Morgan. John is a filmmaker, social worker, and co-founder of Live Your Purpose Media, a storytelling platform dedicated to healing, equality, and social justice. With over a decade of experience in community mental health, including work in Akron's public schools and the first Black-owned, nationally accredited mental health agency in the country, John brings a unique perspective on the intersection of wellness and creativity. He now leads powerful film projects that highlight issues like Black maternal health, incarceration, and men's mental health, while also directing Soft Work, a support network for men to embrace vulnerability and healing. John is committed to helping people live their purpose and share transformative stories that inspire change. Well, we're excited to have John with us today, where we'll explore his journey from social work to filmmaking and men's health advocacy, highlighting how he uses storytelling, community building, and vulnerability to advance healing, equality, and social justice. John, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I know your journey has taken you to a lot of different parts in your career. And I think that is kind of an example of how careers in this field of mental health can really pivot in really creative and innovative ways. So
Yeah.
just to begin, I know that you started as a social worker and you pivoted into filmmaking and you pivoted into men's health advocacy. So I want to just start at the beginning. Can you share a little bit about your journey into mental health and social work and how that first began and what drew you to serve the populations in Akron, Ohio?
I appreciate that on the thoughtfulness behind that question. Listen, so I think one of the most important things that I've learned in my journey is something that my therapist told me years ago when I was talking to her about the weight and the heaviness of being in the field of social work. And she said such a poignant statement to me. She said, John, we don't accidentally find ourselves in this work, right? You know what I mean? And to me, that just summed up so much for me, right? And she was absolutely correct. I didn't choose the path of social work or healing or storytelling. That stuff chose me. You know what I mean? I kind of just answered the calling along the way. So kind of to provide a lot more context around that, my story really just starts with, the people that I come from. I come from really, really good people, who instill really, really deep rooted, really strong values in me, right? And I had to give a lot of the credit to the people that I come from: my mother, my father, my grandparents, my sisters, right? The city that I come from, Akron, Ohio, right? My village and the people that I come from did a really good job of protecting me and making sure that I had really strong values, right? And I think that those values were allowed me to just, move through the world and navigate through the world as I went through my own stuff, right? And as a young person growing up in an environment, and I feel very much privileged today, and even in the era of being, a man in this generation, I have the license and the privilege to be able to talk about men's healing in a way where it's not as taboo as it once was, right?
Mm.
And I say that to say that, when I was a young person in my early days of being an adolescent and, evolving into a teenager, when we were dealing with life, when trauma was impacting our household, that wasn't a thing. Mental health was not a thing. It was not a consideration. It was not a conversation. It was not something that not only did we not talk about, but it was not something that, that provided context to how people were living, right? So I was born in the late 80s. My mother and father, they had me. I was a love child. They were really much in love. They were married for a couple of years and they had me. But I was born in the late 80s, right? So a lot of the country was plagued by the crack epidemic, right? And that struck a lot of my immediate family, specifically my father. And I think that the impact of my mother and father navigating substance abuse for his substance abuse, it caused a real strain, right? But I also think that it my mom seeing that firsthand, not only with my father, but with her friends and her other direct family members. I think for her having a little black boy at that time period, I now understand that for her, she was like, okay, I got to do what I got to do to protect this little boy, right? So coming up in that environment, it kind of set the stage for me to, again, deal with my own trauma along the way. My mother, I think she tried her best, she did her best, but I think my mother lived with a lot of fear as well, and a lot of that kind of dealt with, self-inflicted wounds as well. We grew up in a domestic violence household, excuse me, with her and my stepfather, which again, those things impacted me, right, negatively. So trying to navigate these things, despite having these really strong values, I still was impacted by life in my everyday life, right? And so trying to navigate those things, I always had somewhat of a sense of self, and I always had that leadership quality that my mother tried to give me. So I grew up playing sports. That was like the thing that was the ticket. So I had no idea social work was going to end up into an ex-girlfriend's mother suggested it. I was young, I was fresh out of high school, trying to figure it out. And she just knew that I had these strong characteristics. He said, John, you love people, people love you, they take to you. You should consider going into the social work thing or whatever. And I had never thought about it. I had never considered it. She's the one who really introduced the idea for me. And that was just something I said, you know what? This may be something that I could take to. And that was like those are kind of like it was a lot of life. And it was
Mhm.
again, it was the people around me, ex-girlfriend's mother. She's the one who suggested that to me. And thank God I listened to her.
Yeah. Wow. You know what? What an incredible story. And one of the things that I'm noticing as you're telling this is really the gratitude,
Hmm.
in all of those experiences. It takes a lot of reflection and transcendence to really kind of come to the other side of being like, you know what, these things happen in my life, but I'm grateful that happened because it directed me in different ways. And I sort of
100%.
see your career rippling in that, right?
Mhm,
In the way you've described it, community was a big part of that. And
mhm,
as you've evolved your career, being able to be a voice for the community has sort of rippled.
mhm,
It's
mhm.
rippled in that. And I know I'll start, a little bit earlier in your career. I know you spent 10 years in the first Black-owned, nationally accredited mental health agency in Akron.
Yeah,
And that must have been a great experience. So talk to me a little bit
absolutely.
about what that taught you, especially about the needs of the community, again, that the community theme, but then also about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Again, first and foremost, yeah, shout out to Minority Behavioral Health Group again in Akron, Ohio. Again, there's going to be a lot of common denominators throughout my story of like God showing up and the creator showing up and having this bigger picture in play. I had no idea. I was just surviving. I was just doing the best that I could, and I was being blessed along the way. And NBHG has definitely been one of those, one of those big points for me. Listen, I was fresh out of school. I had got my first like big boy job. I was working in Cleveland at a community center that I really enjoyed. It was like my first experience working in the field, but I was tired of the commute, right? So there's like a 50-minute commute from Akron to
Yes.
Cleveland.
Yes, it is.
And it was just taking a lot, right? It was
Yeah.
taking a lot out on my car. The money was okay, but it wasn't good enough. I'm like, man, I can't do this anymore, right? And so a young lady who I went to high school with, she had graduated within the social work field as well, and she worked at NBHG. And she said, "Listen, John, there's a place here in Akron. They're always looking for good hires. You should look at applying there." I'm like, "All right, cool. If it's gonna give me a chance to work here in the city, I can drive 5 minutes down the street as opposed to 50. I'm doing it, right?" And
Yeah.
in the story of NBHG, that's when it was birthed, and it's so important. Again, I had no idea at the time, but this is the story. When I go into NBHG, I see when I'm sitting in the lobby waiting for my first interview, and I'm on my phone looking at an email or something like that, and all of a sudden I hear a voice that says my name, and I look up, and it's a young lady that I had went to high school with.
Oh,
I hadn't
wow.
seen her. I hadn't seen her in years,
Yeah.
and here she is calling me back to be to go in and get interviewed. So that was right there was like an immediate recognition for me of safety, right? And I knew it's something I felt good about that, right? Make a long story short, NBHG turned out to be such a huge blessing for me, from an education standpoint, from an experiential standpoint, from a community standpoint. And from a abundant of life standpoint, that
Mm.
young lady who I'm referring to, that turned out to be what I had no idea would be. Me and that young lady would go on to get married, right, and have two children, right? You know what I mean? And so again, God having His hand on me and knowing something was much bigger when I was just doing my best to survive.
Yeah.
Turns out to be that Minority Behavioral Health Group is actually a family-owned business that my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and my wife they created 30 years ago, right?
Wow.
And they've been in the work of community health and community service and doing advocacy work and liberation work for years.
Mm.
So this is a bigger play at hand. I just was able to grasp so many different respects from the lens of mental health, from the lens of clinical work, from the lens of social work, from the lens of case management, from the lens of psychology, and again just healing work. And MBHG
Yeah.
was very much the foundation for me. It exposed everything that I know today about mental health, especially as it relates to mental health for Black people. So shout out to MBHG. I would not be here if it was not for MBHG.
Yeah. Wow. Again, just in hearing your stories, one of the interesting things that I'm hearing is not only are you just sort of creating space for things to unravel
Hmm.
naturally, but it also sounds like you're living with intention, but with alignment with maybe like that true self. We
Hmm.
talk about when we can sort of connect with a higher purpose or connect with a higher being, things just sort of naturally unravel. And as you're
Yeah.
explaining your story and you're creating meaning from it, some of these things just life happens for you.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how this transitioned into filmmaking and how you created not only just filmmaking, but the importance of storytelling and how you
Yeah.
created Live Your Purpose.
Yeah. 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 Again, I had no idea, man. I really didn't. When my wife and I got married in 2018. At the time when we had got married, the time we had got married, the year prior to that, I had purchased my first home. I had purchased my first piece of property.
Mm.
And at that time, that was like 2016, 2017, when I had purchased that property. That was like the initial spark of entrepreneurship for me,
Yeah.
right? And so that initial spark of entrepreneurship for me is what, kind of created that bug of like, okay, maybe there is something a little bit more or different than this path of social work and providing direct service, because I love my job. I love working with people. I was doing a lot of work within the school system when I was working with NBHG. I was working in elementary schools, junior high schools, directly with the community, and I really enjoyed that work. But being young, trying to figure it out, I'm like, I want to get some money, right? I want to get some money, but I also am able to reflect and understand now that I also was being led a little bit by my ego too. Being
Mm.
young, I was like, you know what? I want to be able to stand on my own too.
Mm.
I'm really appreciative for the opportunity that NBHG has given me, but I want to be able to work a little bit outside of my family business, right? I want to be able to kind of operate on my own as well, which my in-laws and my family supported that wholeheartedly. And
Yeah.
so the next step was, okay, I'm gonna decide to leave NBHG. And when I left NBHG, I went and worked for the Boys and Girls Club as a team club director. I worked there for like a year.
Mm.
But my whole year when I was there, I was feeding my mind on just reading different literature and just different information over entrepreneurship. And again, the bug just kind of continued to roll and it just continued to build. Again, I'm still kind of having my hand. I'm thinking that it's going to be in the real estate world, real estate investor.
Okay.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm investing a lot of time into that. But what happened was when I was working at the Boys and Girls Club, I'm like, you know what? This ain't it. I miss home. I miss
Mm.
NBHG. But in the process of going back to NBHG, at this time, me and my wife had got married, and I said to her, you know what? I think I want to start a podcast. And I want to start the podcast around, interviewing different entrepreneurs, right? And I want to call this pod. She's like, really? I was like, yeah. And I said, I want to call this podcast Live Your Purpose. Again, 2018, my wife and I had just got married. I was finishing up my last semester at Cleveland State. And one of my favorite artists, his name is Nipsey Hussle. He had came out with his first album in the February of 2018. And he had a line on there and it said, find your purpose or you're wasting air. And I just
Mm.
remember rewinding that over and over and over and over. I'm like, find your purpose or you're wasting the air. Find your purpose or you're wasting the air. And it just really resonated with me. And so I said, you know what? I want to start this podcast where I'll be interviewing entrepreneurs, and I'm going to call it Live Your Purpose Podcast.
Yeah.
Again, started that journey. And that is when, again, to your point of kind of being in alignment and just kind of having that faith to step out and stand on faith without really having so much clarity, without having, knowing all of the answers.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
just kind of went along with it. And that's where it started. And then from doing that podcast and having a great relationship with MBHG, we had the opportunity a few years ago to do a partnership of telling these. We did a partnership with CareSource, an insurance company, and that a nationally known insurance agency. This is a little bit post COVID, so at this time there's a lot of money in the ecosystem to do this work, right? And again, COVID kind of really put a spotlight on the internet and social media and doing these things, within the social media realm and like doing this work to kind of show these visual stories.
Mhm.
And so we had the opportunity to do a partnership with NBHG and Live Your Purpose to tell these stories in these field of topics. And those topics were Black maternal health and in the role of criminal justice, which NBHG was very much versed in and the expertise in providing services within those work. And so me and my wife, we had a conversation and we kind of just outlined more life, and that's kind of when the inception of that stuff came about. But again, I had no idea that that was going to turn into a film. I thought we
Right.
were just going to go in and shoot some content, and that was going to turn into like kind of, narrating and telling these stories. But through the process of recording, next thing I know, we got all of this footage, and I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to pivot. And it turned out to be a really, really, really powerful film. Again, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea that was going to be the case, but I went with it. I took the opportunity again with the partnership with those two great entities, and man, here we are now. We've been able to take both of those films around the country to the Apollo Theater in New York City, to different universities around the country. It's been shown to thousands and thousands of people where we've been able to take those films and take them in the curriculum, to provide them the different education models. So we've just been able to kind of grow it and evolve it.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Yeah, wow. I love your story. And again, to see how your experiences sort of build on top of each other, right? You took your introduction into the social work and you came in alignment with your agency in Akron, and then taking those experiences and turning it into a podcast, and taking those experiences and turning it into a film. It just builds, and you're just creating more and more steam. I think it's very interesting though, because I think one of the unique things and opportunities as a social worker is that you get to really engage the community within points or environments of where they're interacting. And I see that in your films, right? And I don't want to ask you, like, why did you kind of go into these stories of storytelling?
Yeah, yeah. So some of it was like some of it was okay, this is what the job entailed, right?
Sure. Right.
But but where my gifts, if you will, I truly believe my gifts came through and were able to shine through in the films. I started more like I believed in my gifts came through in it was all black men who had their hands on formulating this film, you know, as far as like the creating, the production, and the editing of it.
Yes.
But I'm a young man who grew up with 7 sisters, right? You know, a really close relationship with my mother. And
Yes.
so through learning this information of how profound maternal health was and how many, you know, women are dealing with this on a day to day, it was mind blowing to me, right? You know, and I not only did I see these women who were telling their stories, but I began to see the women in my life, you know, differently, right? You know, I felt like I was able to get a inward look into people who I had cared so deeply for, and they were carrying around something that I had never knew. You know, I remember reflecting in that process of vividly remember my aunt, um, she being pregnant with twins when I was young, in elementary school. And it was like this big excitement of her being pregnant with these twins. And I just remember the whole thing of like she lost them. Right. And it was like a devastating blow to our family, but that's all that it was. I didn't understand the gravity of that. I didn't understand what that meant. But instantly started to think about her. And so in telling this film of more life, I really feel like I was able to add a level of care and gentleness and sensitivity and detail and intentionality that allowed us to showcase not only the birthing women's stories, but we were able to highlight, because More Life is a film where we showcase these four birthing mother stories of their experience with maternal health and being able to bring children earthside. But it's narrated by these three professional black women as well. We have a psychologist, an OBGYN, and then a grassroots nonprofit organization leader. And these women are narrating the story from a professional lens, but they're also speaking to their own experiences of carrying their stress in the body and what it meant to bring children to the life, bring children earthside as being professionals and having all of the credentials, all of this stuff behind them. The idea that people say, well, you're not dealing with the same type of stress that these people are here with. So we were able to kind of showcase this story and weave it all in, and we were able to show the story as far as like we were able to tell this story from a very much nuanced perspective. And what I mean by that is we were able to show the heaviness and the weight of what it's like, you know, when a woman is dealing with the loss of a child. But we were able to also showcase these moments of community of women coming together by building these resources to help when women are, you know, are pregnant and, you know, carrying children. So we were able to kind of like really highlight all of these different parts of just like what it takes really for black women to bring life into the world, right? There's a whole lot that they're up against just to bring life into the world,
Yeah.
right? And we were able to kind of showcase all of that by highlighting the heaviness, but also being able to highlight the joy. And I think that's where our gifts came through, is being able to showcase that in the film. And so in phase two of my life, if more life is what it takes to bring children earthside, my life is the next step. It's all about childhood trauma. It's all about adolescence, and it specifically takes a look at a young man who spent 19 years in the penitentiary by the name of Marcel McDaniel.
Yes.
But he was an extremely gifted child, and he dealt with a lot of severe childhood trauma, physical abuse, emotional neglect. And we were able to kind of highlight him and other children and be able to showcase, hey, this person that we consider that we write off as a criminal or as a person to be bad, that person was once a child, right? And that child is still there. And we were able to kind of reiterate that and reference that so much throughout that film of my life. And again, I think that the gifts and the experience of being in the field, working with children, the thing that I really loved about working with children the most that I was able to take into the filmmaking specifically in my life is when you work with children, Peter, it's a really intimate thing because you are dealing with people experiencing trauma in real time that you know is going to deal with them for the rest of their lives,
Yes.
right? You know, so as I talked about some of the childhood trauma that I experienced, imagine an adult being there with you and they know, hey, this is going to be with you for a minute. You know what I mean? We were able to kind of apply that level of thinking and that level of care and how we form these stories, right? And I think that the mark that we really hit, even though we didn't have we're still continuing to carve out our expertise and our skill set, we really did a really good job of hitting the mark of like pulling on the emotion and the weight of what we're telling within these stories. And I think I was able to do that just by kind of again bringing all of my experiences together to the table and really just giving a damn. And so we just did our best to do that. I believe we hit the mark.
You know, one of the things that I enjoyed so much about those descriptions is you used the word nuance. And I
Hmm.
think that these stories that you're telling are very detailed. You
Yeah.
know, you're talking about a smaller group. And I think one of the things that you're painting is really giving folks an opportunity to kind of come into that experience
Yep.
and you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're hoping folks walk away with. But I think when you present these stories, especially as you present them in a whole, right? You're talking about people up against systemic challenges. You're talking up against people with human experiences in walking through life and having some of these challenges that are almost invisible unless you bring to the surface. And I think
Mhm.
when you start to create those discussions, it creates a little bit more empathy, creates a little bit more compassion. And hopefully, what you're painting is that there's hope at the end of this,
Yep.
right? That yes, this is difficult, those are challenges, but you know, there are brighter sides and there are people out there that, you know, can try and offer some help, right? And
Mhm.
hopefully, and again, this all goes back to the community as we sort of come together with this knowing, we can move forward to a brighter future and a hope that you're outlining in your films.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the number one intention within the film is to humanize people, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? We all hear these stories. We all hear them and by passing, some of us even may even live them on a day to day. We know family members, we know friends, we know people that we're connected to that we can kind of pinpoint. And again, you know, the narration that has been around infant mortality and, you know, specifically Black men being in prison, we know that there's a narrative around those topics, right?
Yeah.
And so our job as storytellers and creators is to humanize people. So that's always the number one intention for me. How do we humanize these individual stories so that no matter who's taking in this information, they're going to be able to walk away and say, "Oh man, I get it a little bit differently than I did prior to." And it's all about showing that humanity piece in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I know you have an upcoming film. You're titling it Do You See Me? And you're
Yeah.
spotlighting the profession and role of social workers.
Hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about that and sort of plug what your upcoming film is. And more
Yeah.
importantly, why this story? Why are you trying to tell this story? And how does it connect to your own identity as a social worker?
Yeah, I gotta give a lot of credit to my wife, right? You know, I may be I may be kind of like the person that like carried a lot of this stuff out. But when it comes to kind of like the brainchild and it comes to like what story we want to tell and why we want to tell these stories, you know, my wife is really much she's really the foundation and she's the head of steam when it comes to this stuff. And so we've been talking about exploring the role of showcasing what healers are experiencing, right? You know, people who are really in the work, people who do this work. We've been talking about showcasing that. And she's been really driving home the point of like, how do we show our story,
Mm.
right? Like, you know what I mean? My wife's a psychologist. She's been in the field a long time as well. And again, going back to that word that I just used about humanizing, a lot of times, man, people just see people as professionals in that world and they don't see us as human, right? You know, they just see us as the professionals and the people. No, y'all should just get it. You know, you're not dealing with the same problems as me. I'm here to talk to you because I'm going through this. You should supposed to give me the answers, right? You know, and a lot of time, again, going back to the first thing that I said from my therapist, we don't find ourselves in this work by accident,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it was all about how do we show our story. And and by our story, we're talking about again healers. We're talking about people who show up and and take up space for people, and people who help hold people's hands on their walk as they find themselves, right? Because that's what it's all about. It's about
Yeah.
providing people the space to be able to get back home to themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so in the film of Do You See Me, yeah, man, we met with a young lady by the name of Jasmine, and we haven't released this film yet, but Jasmine did a really good job. Jasmine's originally from Ohio, but she lives in New York City now. And Jasmine did a really good job of narrating her childhood traumas, and doing a really good job of reflecting on her experiences. Again, unbeknownst to her, she had these gifts of always kind of being able to show up and be that point person for people. Even as early as like junior high school, she always felt kind of called to, like, sit with different groups of people. When people were experiencing things in school, when they were walking around and maybe a little bit more somber, or when it came time for friends to be able to share, come to, dump that stuff, she always kind of find herself in the middle of that. And so a lot of times healers, people who show up in this work, that is one of kind of the common denominators of gifts. Those gifts come from a higher purpose. Those gifts kind of always tend to be with us, and then the experience and then the educational part that comes later. And so we were able to kind of just showcase all of her childhood experiences, and how her childhood experiences ultimately led her, to serving in the role as a professional. But then her experiences as a professional has helped her evolve, not only her thinking as a human and as a woman, but it's helped evolve her in her professional work as well. So it's all about just kind of, again, being able to showcase the humanity of the people who show up every day to help other people, which is oftentimes not a story that's always told.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that cycle too. When we follow our true purpose, things kind of unravel.
Yeah.
And the other side of this is in the work of healing, it can be twofold. And that when we are out there helping other people, it kind of keeps us on our own journey of healing. And
Mhm.
hearing those different stories gives us a chance. And this is why it's so important, going back to the community and healing in a community, because isolation, we can only do so much. But
Oh
being
yeah.
able to heal with others gives us an opportunity to mirror and reflect upon ourselves in ways that we wouldn't do by ourselves. And
Mhm.
so I think that is a very unique perspective within, the profession of social work. Be a healer, but then in turn kind of encourages your own journey.
Yeah, because what I learned is that, people will lean on you, again, unconsciously, too much at your own demise, and
Mm,
again,
mm,
not humanizing you, right? I never forget when I interviewed a pastor on my podcast, and he said that being a pastor was extreme. It was one of the most dehumanizing experiences in the world, if you let it, because a lot of
sure.
times people don't see you as a person. They see you as a leader. They see you as a
Yes.
shepherd. They see you as this person. No, show up for me. And a lot of times in the world of social work, in the world of psychology, in the world of, again, of being a healer, people continue to do that too. Because it's funny, because the first title that I was going to name this I'm Not Your Therapist, right? That was like a tag that I was telling everybody, like, people will call me for advice. Hey, listen, I love you. I may consider and listen to you for a minute, but I'm not your therapist. I need you to go ahead and, go find somebody to talk to you, so you and I can kind of maintain this healthy relationship of being friends or family, whatever the case may be. But again, it's about showing the humanity within people who show up and do this work on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love that. I'm excited to hear more about it. So again, I want to go into even just this fifth phase, and that you co-founded Softwork. That is their men's mental health initiative.
Mhm.
And I know right now in our current age, as men, we're a little confused about our definition of masculinity. But
Mhm.
you've been purposeful about the title of soft work. So I want to
Yeah.
ask you, what does softness mean to you within the context of masculinity and healing?
Yeah, great question. Again, man, I don't think that you can describe softness without describing that word that I've been saying, which is, full humanity, right?
Mm,
And that's really like what the principles of soft work are. It's about exploring these different principles to be able to live in your full humanity. These different principles are having healthy spaces to release, going to places of shame, grief, childhood trauma, relationships with women. And what happens if we don't do this work? These are the principles that we founded soft work around, but it's all about giving men the opportunity to be able to, again, fulfill their humanity. Masculinity and manhood has been sold to us in a box, right? You know what I mean? And a
Yes.
lot of us have adopted that box, and a lot of us have eaten that meal, and it's giving us no nourishment, right? You know what I mean? I think we're seeing a lot of consciousness and awareness from a macro standpoint of a lot of men are coming to grips and say, "Hey, man, this ain't working for me." You know what I mean?
Mm.
And we're starting to see that on a large scale. So that's kind of like the importance of softness to me, is to be able to showcase this opportunity for men to be able to live their full humanity, and being able to be gentle, being able to be soft, being able to be, comfortable with your emotions, being able to say something as simple as, "Hey, I don't know how to do that," or "I don't know what that means." Being able to, to lead yourself to be vulnerable, where there is that window of opportunity where somebody could take advantage of you or use that against you. But the incentive that you're opening yourself up to by being vulnerable in that moment is far greater, right? So it's all about that. And like everything else I've been telling you, Peter, this was just life for me, right? I was running away from this part of the journey. I was running away from this part of doing this work. I was very much comfortable and very much satisfied with helping other people. And I was doing my own work, but I was avoiding this part of it. I was avoiding and running away from the part of, being soft, right? My own internal battles, my own internal resistance to my own experiences about what it meant to be labeled and what it meant to be called soft. That was like one of the number one cardinal sins for a little black boy growing up in the inner city in the early 90s playing sports. Like, that was, you don't do that. Matter of fact, you can't do that. And so there was a lot of, like, internal wrestling that I had to do, with myself, to get to the point to be comfortable of being able to just share the term and the word soft work with the world. I remember the first time I made a post about doing our men's groups, and I was going to put the term out there to the world. It took me like 3 or 4 days just to come to the grips that I was going to share with the world that I'm telling men that it's okay to be soft, right? And I still deal with the internal struggle of being okay with that, but that's something that I continue to try to work through and just be honest about. But one thing that I learned, Peter, is that when I do these groups with men, when I talk to men, when I'm talking to a close friend, when I'm talking to a brother who I don't know, all of us are dealing with this stuff behind closed doors. All of us are dealing with in real time. Hey, these values that I was instilled with to believe, this ain't working for me. And even if somebody hasn't got to the point of being able to, get to that point of admitting that, you'll find the contradictions of, like, saying, "All right, maybe this worked for me," but then you say, "Well, is it working for your family? Is it working for your children? How do your children feel about that? How does your partner feel about that? How do the people you work with feel about that?" Right? And you'll be able to find the contradictions in this stuff. And so, what I learned, again, going back to what you said about healing the community, oh, I'm not dealing with this alone. Right. This is something that other men are carrying and don't know what to do with this as well. So it was just one of those things that was really on my heart and on my mind that I wanted to share. But it's still very much a struggle, if you will, of just peeling the layers back of allowing myself to be soft. I feel like all of 2025 has been a precarious year of just, resisting and surrendering to, surrendering to not being resistant to this part of it. And even though I'm much further along, it's still a struggle for sure. It definitely very much still is a thing that I'm getting comfortable with, and that I'm, continue to be open about. So I'm just still doing the work.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your vulnerability, because really, as you're talking about, I think of the line that says, "It takes a strong man to have a soft heart."
Hmm.
And as you're talking about that, I'm listening to you just expose yourself. I'm like, wow, he's very courageous to kind of come on and talk about that. And even as you're talking about this, I'm finding myself sort of resisting, right?
Hmm.
And even just in this, this I'm talking about the community part. You're reflecting to me that there is still work for me to kind of go in this and maybe pr be a little bit more vulnerable. But when you had reframed masculinity as something that was packaged, and there's something that's so much more that we can be doing in masculinity, I thought that was a great reframe. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's a part of a package. And when we start to incorporate other things like vulnerability, like being able to open up, like coming in tune with our emotions, we can show up better not just for each other as men, but for our families. You brought in the other relational aspects of this and the community as a whole. And I'm like, wow, this this perspective is so good and so needed right now. Again, we're getting
Yeah.
so many messages. There's social media, there's headline news, and it's just very confusing. It's very
Hmm.
confusing. So there is a real need for men out there.
Yeah.
I see it. I see
Yeah.
it. But I know you're very intentional on how your groups are structured. And you're talking a little bit about having smaller groups and why intimacy and safety is critical. So talk to me a little bit about how you're structuring these groups.
Yeah, so our flagship program for software is we do an 8 week men's support group. And again, all 8 weeks are broken down to each one of those software principles that I named a little bit earlier. We focus on each topic each week. And the whole, point behind the groups is to again allow the space, create the space and allow the space for men to be able to show up and, be there, show up and have their full humanity. One of the ways that we do that is by allowing space to make sure that the space is intimate. So we don't allow more than 10 people per group, right? And we do the groups virtually, we do the groups in person. And we have a group this evening at 7 p.m. And what I've learned from being in this group is two main things. Number one, men, when we are given the opportunity and given the space, just the space, when we're given the space, we're going to pour it out, and it's going to seep out. It's not you're not going to you may find it's going to be a little bit resistance, but you're going to see it flow. It's almost like just being so guarded for so long, and then when you finally get it, you're just like, oh, it's this big exhale. So I think that's the first thing that I've noticed is that for a lot of men, man, we just need that space. And I think the other thing that I've really learned and that I've been able to appreciate is that these soft work principles extend to all men, no matter your ethnicity, no matter your sexual orientation, no matter any of that stuff. There is some level of common thread of being able to understand and be able to grasp this idea that again, masculinity and manhood has been sold to all of us. All of us have kind of been, and I hate to use the word, but it's true. Because I know there's a lot of resistance in this as well. But a lot of us have been taken advantage of and been victimized as it relates to how the idea and the package of what it means to be a man, and a lot of us are, holding on to these old ideology, these old stories who not only don't work for us, but they didn't work for the people that came before us either. You know what I mean? Not as it relates to being a full-fledged good human, right? You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
might be able to find, some trinkets along the way, some success, if you will. But again, when you get to peeling them layers back, when you get to looking under the cover, you're gonna see a lot of dirt, right? You know what I mean? And so I think that's that's been the most important thing is, kind of seeing how these things are really very much universal in the language, how much, men really need this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that perspective. And again, having that safe space to share can be a huge opportunity for folks to, I don't know, get curious and
Oh
and
yeah.
and even just show up for each other
Hmm.
and know that there's safety together. I
Yep.
can appreciate that. And I can appreciate the intentionality of the intimacy of those 10-man groups as well. I know you talked a little bit about, this common thread or the universality of normalizing for men, right? But I
Mhm,
also know that there's differences in cultural contexts.
mhm,
I know when we originally talked, we talked about how men's group is kind of a predominantly white male space.
mhm.
So talk to me a little bit about creating space specifically for Black men and how do those needs compare to, maybe others?
Yeah, I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now my wife and I we moved here last October. Um, our both our first time living outside of our hometown, right? We have two young children. We come from a small city that's in Akron. All of our people are there. You know, everything that we know, our community, our businesses, our work, our like our lives, what we know to be true is in Akron, Ohio. And so when we moved out here to Charlotte, there's that transitional period of just like figuring it out.
Yes.
And one of the big things of, when you're doing anything for the first time is going to be community. And so when we first got here to Charlotte, the top of 2025, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get out there and just kind of meet some people, but I'm gonna do it in the framework that works for me. So I joined the men's group here in Charlotte. A friend of mine who we become friends now, he started it, and white dude, and he's really, really a good dude. Like I can just see it in his heart. Like when him and I have conversations offline, like he's just a good dude, you know what I mean? And he gives a damn, man. He has a deep reverence and deep resonance for just like, authenticity and people, really doing the work. Um, and so I attended his men's group for a while. I still attend occasionally. But what became kind of, apparent with being in that space, like, oh shit, man, I'm the only black dude in here, man. You know what I mean? This is cool. I enjoy the space because again, for me, it was very much an education of like, okay, black dudes not the only dudes dealing with the same stuff. Like, white guys are dealing with this stuff too, so it was good for that. But I couldn't run from the fact that, man, there's still a nuance and unique perspective and experience that black people have in America that everybody else just don't have, and that is a that is a thing. I can't say that it's a good or bad thing, but that's a fact. That black people have a unique experience here in America, and so with being there, I think it really created the validity and the credibility to let me know that I was kind of on the right path and want to do the work in soft work. But it also gave me the urgency and it gave me the initiative to say, all right, look, we got to get out there and help, the brothers within my specific community as well. So I'm a black man. All of my majority of my community is black men. When I see black men, I see my father, my uncle, my grandfathers, my friends, my brothers, I see myself when I see these brothers. So it was really important for me to offer this space to other black men because I know again what's having this unique experience. I know that we could receive this differently than anybody else, and I know that there's a need for us that's different anybody else, right? So it was again. I'm a softie, man. So I like to follow my heart. You know what I mean? And this was one of those things that was really on my heart to do so. And so we just continue to evolve it and continue to grow it, man. We got a really good team on soft work, and we just been able to build it and continue to serve as many people as possible.
As we've talked, I appreciate your heart and your alignment and all the things that you're doing, from just your work as a social worker to it expanding into the podcast and your filmmaking. And as you've tried to connect in a needed area for other men and trying to show up in their lives differently. Again, your connection with the community and just it rippling out just goes farther and farther.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that.
So I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about where folks can follow up with you. So let us know where can folks can follow up with your films, where can they learn more about Live Your Purpose Media, and a little bit more about where they can follow up with Software.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so you can find us on www.lypmedia.com. You can reach us there through email as well at info@lypmedia.com. You can email us directly about purchasing the film rental. One of the things that we've been working on, or not even working on, one of the things that we've really been leaning on to lately is creating again a film and curriculum package, right? So we've been partnering different universities and different organizations to be able to present CE trainings for different entities and different individuals within the professional landscape. And that's one of the things that we've been partnering with a bunch of different organizations and entities around the country to be able to help professionals in this line of work get CE certified by using our content as one of the ways to train your professionals, right? So that's one of the things that we're doing big time. And you can connect with us at lypmedia.com to be able to fill out some of that information and to be able to look into how we can partner on doing some of those things. Softwork, www.soft-work.org. And again, you can register for our 8-week support groups there as well. You can make a donation on that website as well. And those are the things you can find us. You can email us over at support@soft-work.org. And yeah, man, reach out to us, man. Be on the lookout for more films, more stories, more products, more merch like the one we wear here. It's getting cold, so it's getting ready to be hoodie season everywhere. So be on the lookout for a lot of the LYP merch, and the software merch as well. But other than that, man, just continue to keep your eyes out on what LYP Media does. We got a lot of things down the pipeline, and one of the things that we really want to look to do is always telling stories with healing at the core. But we're looking at doing things a little bit more lighter, a little bit more, with humor, a little bit more lightness to be able to showcase these stories as well. 'Cause I know a lot of times people think that stuff of healing work and mental health work is a little too deep, it's a little bit too heavy, but we got some lightness coming around too as well. So be on the lookout for us.
Oh, I'm looking forward to hearing more when you guys have it. John, it's been incredible meeting with you today. Thank you very much for coming onto our show.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's been wonderful, man. You did terrific, man. You know what you're doing on that side, man. You doing your thing, man. I really appreciate you having me.
Oh, thank you very much.
No problem.
And I want to thank you, our listeners, for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on all our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and more at Behavioral Health Today. If you like our show, please leave us 5 stars and leave us a review. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all our other episodes can be found on our webpage at tryithq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today. We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tried Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.